Hey guys, it's me, Minecraft World. So, this is a bit out of nowhere, but I just wanted to share a pitch that I've been working on for my idea for a Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire sequel. I've been working on this for about 3 weeks now. I shared a original version of it on Zimzilla's cast a while ago, and ever since then, I've been developing this pitch a lot more, and yeah. Just keep in mind, not everything is fully developed, and yeah. So, without further ado, let us begin. May 2019, Washington, D.C. Sam and L. Brody are hiding in a building as a storm rages on, blotting the sun with lightning striking every single building. The rain crashes down as an osprey lands outside. Ellie and Sam, alongside the group of people they were hiding with, hurry outside and are boarded onto the osprey. The streets begin to flood and the thunder begins to get louder. But hidden within that thunder is a different sound. One that sounds like three souls screaming in the mouths of the devil. Or maybe it's the devil himself. Sam doesn't have time to think about it as he and his mom are hurried onto the osprey. As the thing begins to take off, the lightning gets stronger and more frequent, shaking it. The sound appears again, and this time, Sam's fear gets the better of him. But what he sees is a haunting sight. Washington, D.C. is flooded, and the storm is far bigger than anything he could have imagined. And in the center, the devil is flying, and his three heads are all looking directly at him. Next, we see Godzilla's direct POV, as Ghidorah lifts him up into the sky and lets go, and Godzilla falls from orbit, fading to black beneath the clouds. Godzilla awakens, spooked. He looks around, realizing that he was having a nightmare. He looks up to the sky and sees a full moon with a bright, starry night. Godzilla takes a breath and stands up, headed towards the Mediterranean Sea. We next see Monarch in another Senate hearing, this one far more heated than the last, as head of Monarch, Mark Russell, is in a near argument with a senator. The meeting itself is meant to address the events of Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla x Kong, as world militaries are fighting to either kill, contain, or exile the Titans to Hollow Earth, with Monarch either explaining why some of the Titans being on the surface has done far more good than harm, reversing many of the human-caused issues with the planet, or trying to control them would likely cause a greater apocalypse than anything Ghidorah could have done, as shown by ancient stories from the Iwi and Atlantis. The topic of Rome is brought up, and Rick Stans makes a snide comment of, "It's not our fault that the Italian government is so stubborn." After another debate, Mark eventually makes a deal with the senators, asking for Monarch to be given one extra chance to redeem itself, presenting their case. After some debate, the senators, reluctantly, agree. Light sighs of relief are heard, but none from Mark. Later that night, Mark is reminiscing on the events of KOTM, as news in the background explains that 10 years has passed since Godzilla killed Ghidorah in Boston. As the city, slowly but surely rebuilding, was visited by Godzilla earlier that day, who decided to take a short jaunt around the ruins of the city, stopping right in front of the rebuilding area before making his way back to sea and heading north towards Tiamat's former lair. Mark really isn't listening to it, though, as he's holding a framed picture of him, Emma, Madison, and Andrew before the events of Godzilla 2014. Later, he's joined by Sam Coleman, who has a short conversation with him. After Sam leaves, Mark's phone vibrates as he receives a text from Madison. After some catch-up, with Madison off on her own Titan-related missions in Africa, Mark then heads back inside. Godzilla arrives in Tiamat's lair and looks around, clearly regretful of what he did back in GxK. He then leaves back for Rome. Meanwhile, in Rhode Island, Sam Brody, now much older, leaves the bar, heads home, packs his stuff, and gets on a plane heading east towards Rome. The next morning, Godzilla walks up to the Colosseum, but stops. He looks around, seeing a massive crowd of humans all looking at him. Godzilla looks very surprised and confused, not really having paid attention or even seeing this many humans in such a long time. However, a different sound catches his attention. He looks down and sees a mute little girl hiding behind her mother, clearly frightened by him. The girl's mother asks, "Are you okay?" And the girl responds, signing, "Scared." Godzilla takes a moment to figure out what's happening, but then lets out a comforting noise that almost sounds like a purr. The little girl notices and calms down, curious at what Godzilla just did. Godzilla then makes a face that tells her, "I'm not going to hurt you." And the little girl, now understanding, smiles in response. Godzilla then settles back into the Colosseum and rests. That night, Sam Brody breaks into the Colosseum and goes up to where he could see Godzilla. Godzilla, sensing Sam's presence, wakes up and sees him, with confusion in his eyes. Sam then speaks to Godzilla, telling him who he is and reminding him about his father, Ford Brody, who destroyed the Muto nest and whose life Godzilla saved 15 years prior. Godzilla's confusion turns to recognition as Sam says that his father wanted to thank him for so long, but couldn't. After a silent moment, both Sam and Godzilla are spooked by the sound of thunder. A thunderstorm starts building around Rome, and Godzilla's face turns to anger. An echo of Ghidorah's roar is heard. Godzilla stands up, charges up, roars, and then blasts his atomic breath at the storm, dissipating it. Godzilla then looks back at Sam, motioning him to leave as he goes to rest. Sam then leaves the Colosseum, but is soon surrounded by Monarch guards. Sam is taken into custody and interrogated by Mark, with him explaining who he is, with us learning that he became a pilot after the events of KOTM, and Mark later deciding to take him with Monarch after some talk. That night, in the rainforest, Outpost 58 is silent, as Behemoth is resting, but a beeping noise soon resonates as an object appears on site radar. A bright light interrupts the night sky and soars past, crashing into the rainforest, and Behemoth stirs. Later, a village in the forest is attacked by a small, bat-like monster as a larger, more draconic beast rises up from the treetop where the meteor was. That morning, Mark is in a hurry as both Godzilla and Behemoth have awakened, and the two are headed right for where the meteor landed, with Godzilla as well being in a hurry. But before Godzilla can enter the Mediterranean Sea, a bright light appears behind him as Mothra lands on the Colosseum. She's curious about why Godzilla is so much in a hurry and why he's been acting so angry as of late. Godzilla, frustrated, brushes her off and heads into the water. In the rainforest, Behemoth lumbers towards the crash site, which is still smoking. He sees the meteor, which is cracked open, and later, the village that was attacked and destroyed. Behemoth soon grows concerned until a large hand grabs his neck and lifts him up, choking him. The creature, standing at 180 meters tall with wings that span 4 times that, tightens its grip slightly as it studies Behemoth, curious about the planet it has landed on and the monster in its hand. Behemoth swings his tusk, striking the creature in the arm. Behemoth lands with a crash and rams the creature in the stomach, winding it and knocking it back. The two engage in a short battle with Behemoth being on the back foot. That is until a blast of purple flame slams into the creature's back, catching its attention. Godzilla stomps onto shore, very clearly enraged. He looks at Behemoth, who has clearly taken a beating, and then back at the creature, who itself looks confused and slightly frustrated. Godzilla roars at the monster and charges towards it, striking it in the head and dealing a hard blow. The creature retaliates as Behemoth, slightly recovered, joins the fight on Godzilla's side. The two monsters hold their own decently against the new creature until it unleashes its army, a swarm of bat-like monsters, which attack the two titans like wasps. And the creature uses this to its advantage. Godzilla begins to charge up his atomic breath, but the creature responds with its own beam attack, searing Godzilla's flesh and slamming him into the ground. The creature then leaves, feeling the threats have been dealt with. And soon, Mothra arrives, now more concerned about Godzilla and Behemoth. She begins to heal them, and the three make their way north. On the Argo, Monarch is now frantic with the arrival of the new monster and the fact that it almost took out two titans on its own. Rick is trying his best to keep track of it, with his projections leading all over the place, and Sam Coleman is tracking Godzilla, Mothra, and Behemoth, who are following behind the creature. And Mark is dealing with all of this, with the pressure of his deal with the U.S. Senate looming high over his head. After some discussions, Sam Brody then weighs in, and the humans soon figure out that the creature is headed towards Mexico City. And fast. Dr. Chen then finds something. She pulls up a historical document hidden by the U.S. government, dated 1947, which discusses an extraterrestrial bat-like creature crashing down in Roswell, New Mexico. One agent, after dissecting the creature, was soon driven insane, reporting to have very vivid dreams of another massive creature, with the blood of humans dripping from its maw. The man called the creature he dissected a probe bat, which was part of an army belonging to the monster that eats mankind, the one that he called the Griffin. After some discussion, the Monarch team, realizing what's about to happen, acts. Monarch immediately gets into contact with the Mexican government, and Sam Brody joins G-Team in assisting evacuations. But it's too late. While evacuations are almost done, the Griffin lands in Mexico City. The remaining people panic and begin to crowd. Some of the Ospreys leave as Monarch's forces engage in combat with it, with the Griffin unleashing its army of probe bats in response. The Griffin then turns to the crowd and bends down and slams its jaws upon the crowd of humans. 3 Ospreys are crushed and Sam bolts out of the way into the city. Monarch's forces fire everything they have at the Griffin, now having its full attention, but the gunfire is cut off by a bright light and a roar. Godzilla, with Mothra and Behemoth following behind, stomps into Mexico City as the Griffin turns to face them. Godzilla, seeing the damage around him, grows more and more enraged and charges, and the Griffin leaps into the air and slams down in response. The Titans engage in a long, drag-out fight, as Sam is just trying to survive and get to a safe space whilst trying to contact the Argo. Whilst the Titans have a stalemate at first, the Griffin soon calls back its probe bats, which merge with it, making it bigger and stronger than before. And with that new strength, the Griffin then backhands Mothra, knocking her to the ground, and then flips Behemoth and decks him, knocking him down. Godzilla, seeing this, grows enraged as the Griffin soon turns its fury on him. It unleashes its own beam attack on Godzilla, knocking him back. Godzilla strikes the thing with his tail and unleashes a powerful atomic blast. But it doesn't do much, as the Griffin reveals a new power, firing lightning beams from its wings, knocking Godzilla back, and beginning to pound on him like a gorilla. Godzilla then receives a massive beating, getting his body bruised and scarred left and right. Mothra, now regaining consciousness, responds with a fury of her own, as she musters all of her strength, takes off, and lights her body, blinding the Griffin and getting its attention. She repeatedly flashes her body with bright lights, demanding the Griffin to back away. Behemoth also gets back on his feet, charges, and slams into the Griffin's stomach. Mothra then continues her bright lights and spinning her silk. and the Griffin, frustrated and annoyed, flees. Mothra and Behemoth then calm down and turn back to Godzilla, whose breathing has become far more growly and heavy. The two have a small talk and try to figure out what to do next, and Behemoth proposes an idea. Mothra then lifts Godzilla and lets him onto Behemoth's back as the two carry him east towards a nearby Hollow Earth portal. Later, a bunch of Monarch agents land on the ground in order to clear up the rubble, with Sam coming out of it and joining back up with them, clearly hurt during the fight. Mark asks Rick for a course projection as he gets into contact with the United States and Mexican government. Meanwhile, in Hollow Earth, Mothra and Behemoth make their way towards Kong's kingdom. Kong, in the time between movies, has cleaned up Lower Hollow Earth, discovering new things about it as he and the rest of the apes have been building and settling in as Scar King's former kingdom has been transformed. Kong sits on his new throne and is teaching the young apes sign language. Then, he notices Mothra calling for his attention, and that is soon followed by Behemoth carrying Godzilla on his back. Kong hurries up to help Godzilla and takes him into a new area they've found, which is full of Hollow Earth energy. Behemoth sets Godzilla down as Shimo arrives and blows some frost onto Godzilla's wounds. Godzilla slowly awakes, confused about what happened. He then sees Kong and his apes and jumps up to attack before wincing in pain. Mothra and Behemoth hold him back and explain that Kong can help. Godzilla's rage subsides, and he looks around. He then sees carvings made by the apes in another room and walks towards it. The carvings recount the events of the Titan's past. But Godzilla stops at a carving of Ghidorah. Godzilla begins to growl and pant as his rage reaches a boiling point, and he tries to destroy the carving. Kong walks up to him, puts his hand on Godzilla's shoulder, and, in a question, makes the sign for scared. Godzilla, slightly taken aback, and remembering how the little girl acted, takes a moment and nods. Kong himself looks a little surprised at this, as Godzilla looks back at the carvings, remembering the fall from orbit and his witnessing of Mothra's death. Godzilla makes a growling noise and makes his way back to the energy source and lies back down. Kong, Behemoth, and Mothra then look at each other and back at him, concern in their eyes. Back on the Argo, Sam has recovered a bit more after the battle, as everyone else is tense and looking things up. Mark then storms into the room and everyone turns to look at him as he explains that the US military has agreed to aid them, with everyone relieved and deciding to take a break. Mark then sits down and Sam Brody joins him as the two have a proper conversation, with Sam explaining that his father died fighting Ghidorah during the Washington, D.C. attack, and his mom fell into a deep depression because of it, and the last he saw her was her sprawled on her bed, gun in hand, and head bleeding. Mark and the rest have more discussion, and Rick chimes in to let them know that the Griffin has reappeared and is now on the move towards Salt Lake City. The Argo soon arrives at the Hill Air Force Base and meets up with the military men stationed there, and the two come up with a plan to evacuate the civilians before the Griffin arrives, and to send as many troops and aerial weapons as possible to hold it off. Mark then calls all Monarch resources to Salt Lake City, and the plan goes under effect. Ospreys head out, tanks, cannon, artillery, and newly developed masers surround the city, and fighters take off, soon finding the Griffin and lighting their guns up. Meanwhile, in Hollow Earth, Godzilla awakens as everyone is asleep. He looks around, now more healed but still aching, and makes his way to the entrance of Kong's home. He looks back at the other Titans and sighs before making his way out. Godzilla's journey back to the surface is intercut by Monarch's evacuation efforts and the battle against the Griffin, as they are successfully holding the thing back and getting everyone out of the city. And as the last Osprey stops, Godzilla finds a portal to the surface. Godzilla takes a moment to breathe, looks back at the direction he came, and leaps into the portal. In Salt Lake, a thunderstorm is brewing as the last Osprey leaves the area. The Argo takes back off with Mark, Sam Brody, and others still on the ground. The Griffin lands at high speed, leveling some of the buildings around, and roaring to signify its arrival. The Griffin looks around, confused that there are no humans for it to feast on, before looking up at the sky and seeing jets fly above it. Then turns, looks around, and sees the artillery aimed at it. Finally, Mark, through comms, commands them to light 'em up! In an instant, every single piece of weaponry fires, launching electricity and artillery fire at the Griffin, annoying it. The fighter planes unleashed their missiles at it and blasted in the face, knocking the thing back. Suddenly, a bright yellow light emanates from the smoke as a beam blasts through the mountains, wiping out the armada and leveling the city. As the smoke clears, the Griffin's rage is shown in full force as it roars into the sky. But that roar is cut off by a bright blue and purple light. The ground shakes, and a portal to Hollow Earth opens. And from it, Godzilla leaps out, lands on the ground, and stomps towards the Griffin, which looks slightly surprised. But that surprise turns into a smile when it notices that Mothra and Behemoth aren't with Godzilla. The Griffin chuckles as Godzilla's fury grows bigger. Godzilla then inhales and lets out a booming and powerful roar, shattering any remaining glass, shaking the city around, and echoing across the mountains. Even the Griffin is taken aback by the power of this roar. Godzilla then charges at him, stomping his footprints onto the street, and rams into the Griffin, unleashing hell upon the creature, culminating in him blasting his atomic breath, pushing so hard it begins to turn to proper flame and burst out of his gills as steam. Godzilla then stops, takes a breath, and is knocked to the ground by the Griffin. We then see his POV as the Griffin, furious, reaches down towards him. Mothra then jumps awake, looks around, and sees that Godzilla is gone. She looks out at the entrance and senses where Godzilla is, as we hear an echoey version of his roar. Mothra, panicking, awakens Behemoth and Kong as they, alongside Shimo, hurry to the surface. Salt Lake has been reduced to ruins as Godzilla, who is severely hurt, is thrown onto his back. The Griffin steps towards him and looms above him, reaching down and grabbing him by the neck. It then spreads its wings and flies into the sky. Godzilla notices and begins to panic, scratching and clawing, trying to break free, and in his panic, he unleashes a nuclear pulse, knocking the Griffin back and causing him to fall to the ground and land with a hard crash. The dust clears, Godzilla's vision goes blurry, the sounds around him go echoey, his heartbeat gets louder, and his breathing gets heavy. We get a few moments to settle on this, until the Griffin arrives and begins bashing Godzilla's head into the dirt before lifting him up and chucking him away. Godzilla slams into the ground, his heart pounding. The Griffin begins to stomp towards him as Godzilla, in fear, tries to escape. The Griffin steps on his tail, holding him in place, and prepares to fire its beam and lightning from its wings. Godzilla closes his eyes out of fear, but the Griffin doesn't fire. Instead, a bright light shines as the Griffin steps back, covering its eyes. Godzilla gets back up slowly as Mothra lands in front of him. Looking at the portal, Godzilla sees Kong wearing the beast glove and holding his axe, Behemoth, and Shimo. All four of them unleash their might on the Griffin, knocking it back and holding it down temporarily. Godzilla acts frustrated that they're there and tells them to leave, but Mothra, Behemoth, and Kong protest, and the monsters have a conversation, convincing Godzilla to let them join. He has no need to fight alone, and Godzilla relents, telling Kong and Mothra to go high, Behemoth and Shimo to go low, as he goes head-on. The Griffin gets back up, and Godzilla commands his allies to charge. The Titans engage in a long battle as the Griffin at first appears stronger than all five Titans, but as the fight continues, the Titans soon wear it down and gain the upper hand, with Monarch's remaining forces joining in later. ultimately culminating in Kong cutting off its wings, Behemoth breaking its legs, Mothra tying its arms, and Shimo freezing it. Godzilla then walks up to the Griffin and stares it dead in the eyes, charges up his atomic breath, and blasts it right through the creature's chest, shattering and incinerating it. Godzilla takes some breaths and looks back at the Titans. They take a moment before Godzilla roars into the sky with victory, the rest of them joining in. The Titans acknowledge their alliance as all five go their separate ways, with Monarch soon leaving as well. Behemoth goes back to rest in the Amazon rainforest, Mothra goes to the former Outpost 61 in China, Kong and Shimo return to his kingdom in Hollow Earth, and Godzilla returns to the Colosseum, looking up at the full moon and starry night sky. The end.